150,000, and I'll talk about what that is. But the big piece is the general fund number. So when you see the 661, that's how much would come out of our general fund, which is basically our unassigned fund balance. That number, 661, 700, compared to last year we adopted 696,000 coming out of our unassigned balance. Overall, the funding breakdown, if you look at the rate, kind of working backwards, at the top of that little table, 811,000 is what the funding breakdown comes to for 2020 if adopted as proposed. And last year we were over $1 million. So we've pared back some because of the flat looking revenue, but also some of the projects are already funded left over from last year, so we don't need to add a whole lot more. And then if you look further down, you'll see that I tried to keep it pretty close, but there are some things that are pending that are very large items if we are going to pursue those. Fire trucks, $700,000. At some point in time, we'll need a new street sweeper, a dump truck if we're gonna, as we look to annexation, some of those pieces of equipment we have won't necessarily keep up with some of the longer stretches of road that we may end up bringing in. So depending on the decisions we make for the future, it will affect our capital spending as well. So I've kind of sort of projected for some of those big ticket items in the future. Again, it's just projection. We don't have to. We can adjust this as we go on, but that gives you a breakdown of what we're looking at. If we were to do all of this and our revenue stay flat, by 2023, our unassigned fund balance would be about $1.5 million. And right now we're looking at 2.9 million. So spending down is a good thing. You just have to decide, when do we stop pulling from that
That's
unassigned
right,
reserve?
yeah, when do we stop doing it? Yeah.
Talking to Fairbanks, they keep it at about 17%, which is 2 months, which we have in our letter. It says what that is, but we're well above that right now. So, for the right projects, for what the council believes is right for our community, it's still safe to dip into our unassigned reserve at this point. In my projection is no more than 660. But again, y'all can add to that or take it away depending on what we think we're going to do in years out. So back to page 175, the actual projects. So I'll go through these line by line on what they mean and how I project, if we do this, to spend these funds if they're allocated. So the first one at the top of the line is MCA equipment. That's for our compressor room. We've been doing this for 2 years now. We spent half of that on a compressor upgrade and a control box. I'm requesting or proposing to add another 20,000 to take it to 40 again, because the equipment in that room is aging, and if we can rebuild or replace, that helps us carry it along. And the projection that I have is continue to add 20,000 each year until it's either rehabbed or we convert it to something else. So for 2020, an initial 20,000 to take us back up to 40. Don't necessarily think we will spend it all, but that's something when we talk about deferred maintenance, that's a good number I think we should continue to go towards. The Bailey Reservoir, we started to paint it. It's soaking up the paint. We also believe we may have a leak in that tower. So I'm recommending we add another 50,000 to take us up to 75, and if we can get an assessment on it in the summer to see if we can if we need to reline it, or if it's something it's on further down, not the tank itself. And if it doesn't need to be lined, then we can use that towards painting it. But we definitely need to do something with that tower. Maybe put a skin on it as opposed to the insulation that was there. But that at least gets it started and has us going the right direction.
But would the relining come out of the enterprise fund rather than out of our?
It could, yes. At this point, we're getting pretty close to.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yes, I understand that.
I don't know why, and that's a good point. I don't know why maybe that is water sewer. I just didn't put it in the right place. But that's definitely recommended we put 50,000 towards that project. It's listed as water sewer. I don't know that I directed finance to put that under water sewer. Water sewer, okay, so it is in water sewer then. ADA sidewalks, that's our matching portion for the 300, or the grant that we received this year. That's the full amount. I don't know what it would be for 21 or 22, but projecting 50,000 each year, continue that out. But 61,000 is what's required for the match for 2020 for the grant we've already been awarded. Police radios, this is 100,000 towards the lease that we've going into our, I believe our third year. And then you can see it carries on for 2 more additional years into 2022. There are still some funds left in that account because we've been able to garner other sources of funding. E911 went towards that. But putting 100,000 in that fund each year will keep us healthy to make sure that we don't default on a lease payment. The street maintenance, this was the paving fund. As you can see, the balance is about 623,000. My intent with that fund is for when the Metropolitan Planning Organization comes into effect, that's matching funds for federal funds. That's a 90-10. And I'd recommend we put another 100,000 into it, but I also recommend that we start spending some of that down so that when in 2021, when those first funds become available, that we have shovel-ready projects. We'll need to do some engineering, some design, not necessarily some design work, but that would be for actually paving roads. Further on down, I've got another line in to repair some of our gravel roads in the meantime. But my intent with that is to leverage federal funding and to have a healthy fund there so that when it starts, we're not trying to figure out where to get money for that.
On that, is in the CIP where you have it, or in the operations regarding the street humps to be installed on some of the streets where we're having so much
Right now,
traffic problems?
depending on how big we go, that would come out of our road operations. If we go with something bigger than, if we go with more than one speed table to slow traffic down, then we would have to either reallocate within that roads fund or reappropriate or move funds from here. But this one, in my mind, is strictly for paving.
Okay.
So I really wouldn't want to touch it. Again, you can give me direction to use it for something other than just paving, but when it was first set aside, it was to pave Auckland. But we never were able to get additional funding for matching to make that project come to fruition because it was $1 million project. So that's when the intent was to pave a road. So I'm still keeping with that intent, but if it's to do other things with roads, we can do that as well.
And do we know if on Auckland the residents are willing to kick in the 25%?
There really
or-
wasn't, just anecdotal, it's no. But that's not to say that if we were able to do a 90-10, then that 25 comes down quite a bit because then it's just paying the 25% of the 10. So we would calculate that differently than we had in the past. So potentially the money would be, if we're asking for citizens to kick in, it would be a lot less than we thought.
Okay.
That would be the same thing without the city. And if the city's
Right.
portion is 10%, when you spread that around, it gets to be more palatable. You're talking hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars.
Right,
Most folks are
yeah,
willing to do that.
yeah,
Madam Mayor,
yes.
have we done any preliminary engineering on that Auckland project?
We had an initial engineer's estimate that's several years old. So that's what we based our estimates on. The next one is public video. It looks like we'll have about 50,000, just under 50,000 now remaining in that fund. I don't recommend putting anything else towards it at this point until we decide where the next cameras are gonna go. And there's several options we could do. The skateboard park. There's been mention of putting something at the new trailhead on the Copperwood property. That's now our property. So depending on what that looks like, vandalism and such, that might be another place we look to put cameras. So I think we're safe right now leaving it where it is. We can also pursue funding from other sources like we did with the amusement park. But from the city's portion, I think that's fair at this point.
And we do have the video at the amusement park, do we?
Yes.
And how has that worked out? Has that helped at all?
It's not vandalism season.
Oh, okay. So when did we install?
There's still one camera going in the parking lot now. I don't know that it's active, but the other cameras were up and running about a month ago.
Oh, just a month ago. Oh, okay. Okay.
The biggest thing about that park really is the porta potty pad, and that's where most of the vandalism has been seen. There's been certain instances in the park where, again, anecdotally, the needles have been found. I'm not sure that's happened in recent past, but that we'll be able to see activity in the park as well.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Lift stations, well pumps, so it says 30,000, we spent that already. So we're down, actually down to zero. 55,000, will help. We may need to bump that depending on, the availability of an air compressor for the, MMBR that's available, through a third party as opposed to going direct to manufacturer. This all goes towards our requirement to fund short-lived assets, and we have a requirement to hit a certain dollar amount, so between that and the trucks, that's an appropriate amount for this year, but as we go towards, in further on time, those amounts will need to get bumped up. This will be the last year that we buy a truck for a while in the water sewer department. All their trucks, with the exception of one, have been handed over to the grounds crew. And after grounds crew, they go to the wrecking yard for the most part. We do auction them off, but by the time they've made it to their next life, they're not really worth much. The police vehicle, we've been buying two. Prices of those cars have gone up. Recommending we add 50,000 to take us up to one car plus a radar, and then any shortfall is made up with our other special funds. But still 3 more years to get all of the front wheel drive or all the rear wheel drive vehicles out of our fleet. I believe we still have 1 Dodge and 2 Crown Vics. They're still serviceable, but we really need to get to the all-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive fleet. We aren't chasing folks up and down the highway, so I don't think we really need that type of vehicle. And the current chief supports that, and the new chief will have to support that. And then we'll be able to take a break. Our fleet is relatively new across the board. We'll still need to continue to replace vehicles, but not as often as we have. I think the next one on the list after the fleet cars is actually the chief's car. So that'll be a couple of years out. Park improvements, I'm not recommending adding anything else there. It's a pretty healthy fund until we decide what we're gonna use that for. Several places we could do that, we'll need some guidance on where is our next park. I think the council will need to provide guidance to the Parks Board on what to look at, because there's several different areas that we can focus on. The Cedar Hills was told they would get the next park. We haven't done anything, but they haven't really come forward either. The Copper Root is now our property, and then the piece up in Hidden Ranch is now our property, so where are our priorities, what do we wanna do? And that would be a good starting point to build a new park if that's what we choose to do. Building maintenance, it's healthy at 85. Recommend we bump it back up another 15,000 to keep it right around 100, and that's for deferred maintenance and as things come up for our public buildings to make sure that we keep them safe. Fairbanks is doing a big push. I don't know if you've heard what happened with one of their facilities. They had an engineer come in and do an assessment. It was a building they knew they had problems with, but they actually had to condemn it over a weekend. One of their community centers. So I don't wanna get us to that point where, somebody comes in and tells us, surprise, this isn't a safe building. The one that had the most problems, we've really pretty much taken care of, which is our public safety building. But we do have some aging facilities that we should keep that about where it is. Airport and safety improvements, at the time I put this together, I didn't know what our potential grant for 2020 was. Excuse me, looks like we'll get a grant for our navigation easement, which is basically to do a survey of the trees and the property to the north of the airport, which gets into the Matt River Park area. Our intent is not to clear cut and expand the runway, which is the current rumor. Our intent is to ask the borough to be a partner. We'll take down the trees that are sticking up too tall and then replace them with trees that won't get to the point where they're a danger to the airfield. But there's a lot of folks that have taken that the city of Palmer wants to clear cut the Matt River Park, which is not true. We want to help them. A lot of them are dead cottonwoods that are going to fall on somebody anyway. But the FAA is part of once we do this study, the FAA will help us, the 93 to 6 matching to go in and take down the trees that are unsafe, that are in the inappropriate place, and then replant trees. So it's not a clear cut that everyone in the parks, the borough has been telling folks. But 16.6 is what we're looking at for the matching for next year, and that will get us the study and then tell us which trees or how much and what the future would hold. And then that would be the follow-on grant for 2021 or 2022.
Should this one though then go into the airport
Yes,
rather than?
well, it'll come out of the general fund.
Right, yeah,
And it'll go into the airport.
right,
Yeah, to
yeah.
the enterprise fund.
So it will it change our figures that we have in
Yes,
this
it will by
proposed budget also?
16,000.
So we need those new figures for that then. Okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So excuse me.
Just quickly, how far into the river park are we talking about?
Almost all the way to the river. We have a portion of that already, which is the borough gave us navigation easement. Basically, it's, we can make sure that there's no trees in a certain area, but it didn't cover the full width of the runway. So there's another half of that that's pokes up into the airspace. Is what it basically does. It's at this point what it does to us is we've got the full runway, but because the approach angle and takeoff angle is not the full length of the runway, there's a line that's painted that this is where the usable part of basically the usable part of the runway, and there's several hundred feet that we're not supposed to use because the angles don't match with the trees and the approach to the airport. And those trees continue to grow, then that line gets our 6,000 foot runway or 5,000 foot runway becomes shorter and shorter. It's just a 5,000 foot piece of asphalt, but we can only use so much of it because of those trees. And every year they get taller, so. Well, it's like our golf course. If you go out there, you see a tree that's been cut in half. That was why it wasn't taken down, because the golfers really wanted that. It's part of the game to have a tree stuck in the middle of your fairway, but the airport couldn't take off, so they basically just chopped the tree down, and that wouldn't be our intent over there. But our intent over there would take down the dead trees, plant some type of evergreen or some other native tree that would grow back up, but not grow to be 200 feet tall or 100 some feet tall. The next two are a golf course. The first one are for carts and equipment. So George has a plan for keeping our golf carts up to date, and also for some mowers and things like that. The next line, the golf course infrastructure, is for improvements to the infrastructure. The patio and grill area is one, and then the snack shack, potentially either bringing a new shed in or rehabbing that one out there where it is. So 20,000 for equipment, and then 20,000 for the actual infrastructure, which is about half of what we've done in the past, at least the last year. Depot updates, nothing new there. We haven't done the piping. We're actually looking at insulation and some piping, which we should be able to cover for the most part with what's already there. No additional funds needed. New projects for 2020, roads, a sander truck with a plow blade. Our current sander truck, the sander is fine, but the truck itself is starting to shed bits and pieces of its undercarriage because of the salt. So we would request that the new truck be purchased, and then we move the sander over on top of that. And of course with the plow blade to go with the sander. The next one this is the one that was kind of an add-on. I know I've talked in the past about having a laser. No, I've given up on the laser. But it's one person here that remembers that. Gravel roads. If we aren't going to update or pave our roads anytime soon, we need to rehab a lot of our gravel roads, especially the ones crossroads of Dolphin, Caribou, and then Chugach, and then Denali are the worst. And then as you go into the Gold Key and those roads over there, they're not too bad. But if we go another 5 or 6 years, because what's happening is we're scraping them, and we're scraping them, and we're scraping them, and now the road bed is no longer as tall, and our drainage is bad. So there's a piece of equipment out there that we can attach to our loader. Now I think it's called a pave ripper. Basically attaches to your bucket, and it chews up the rock, gravel, and dirt, and you can also mix in an additive if we go down that road, and then you can roll it. You can bring in new gravel, additional gravel, and it helps kick up the fines. The drawback to something like that is having a crew. We only have so many people, so the same people that do the summer work, and I'm not talking about the grounds crew, it's our road grader operators. They're the same ones that do our streetlight repairs, the ones that do our concrete supervision, that do our own concrete work. So having a piece of equipment that's not manned is a potential issue. And I've had a discussion with our public works director and superintendent, we need to do this, but can we do it? So the piece is at least have a line there that if we figure out how we can do it, at least we can afford the equipment. So about 75,000 for the equipment and another 25,000 for an additive instead of calcium chloride. The dust that we've been putting down, it's a liquid. It's similar to calcium chloride, but it's a liquid, and they've tested it over on somewhere around Big Lake, and it seems to hold up quite a long time. So that would be something for you to consider for gravel road rehab as opposed to paving. On the flip side, so that's short term. If we want to fund something long term, that's about the same amount I would recommend if we're going to look at annexation. Talked to Soldotna, and they've just now submitted their petition to the LBC, the Boundary Commission. It's taken them 5 years to get there. They said the first thing they did was their fiscal study, and then a public outreach and a survey. And the city manager said if they had to do it again, she would fund all three at once, because by the time they got halfway through their fiscal survey, the pitchforks were already out for those that were not even in the area that was being considered to be annexed, but the public outcry on annexation had started before they even could get going. So her recommendation was, if you're gonna do this, do all three about the same time. Make sure your public outreach and your fiscal study are done together, and then you continue your public outreach piece throughout the life of the project. Your survey is a one-shot deal, where basically it's not so much a survey that you run in the field, but it's a map survey so that you have your boundaries to go hand in hand with your fiscal study, so that you know how much it's gonna cost you, and then they can determine what the benefit is to the public and the whole piece that goes with it. And then, after that, you can start having your public hearings on, okay, here's the big picture, how do we neck it down? Or maybe we'd like to annex this the first 5 years, this the next 5 years, and this, 10 years from now as we can afford to, or as public sees that's how they wanna do it. But again, the ballpark figure is about $100,000 to get that started.
For those three items, about
Yeah, minimum
100,000.
of 50 for the fiscal study, and then the public outreach is as big as you wanna get, depending on what kind of feedback we start to hear. And then the survey that's pretty standard.
So
that'd be-
100,000 for those first three, did I hear you right?
To get started, yeah, the study is a
Okay.
one-shot deal, unless it takes us 10 years and you have to redo it, but the public outreach is ongoing, depending on what the public sense is, at least get the right message out. We already started some of that, just internally, talking with the survey we did, so folks, they know we're thinking about it. But to get the word out on, we're not gonna do a forced annex, we're not bringing everybody in, it's not our intent, but to have some public meetings throughout the process, just and then to do surveys and things like that, we're just not, we're not the study people, we're not the survey people, we have to hire, if we wanna do it right and be successful, hiring a PR company, basically.
Hey, can we go back to the road additive stuff? So right now we use calcium chloride. What's this liquid stuff?
I couldn't tell you what the components are, but it's deemed safe in California. They use it there quite a bit. So if it can be used in California, generally I think it can be used about anywhere without too much fuss. EPA approved. But it's still calcium, magnesium based, much like everything else, but it's in liquid form. In some of the southern states, it's lime based, but our soils aren't. Our soils don't take to lime like they do down there.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Councilman West, thank you.
Thank you. In years past, you had kind of floated the idea of a pavement repair, kind of a hot shot kind of situation where it sits over the top of potholes and heats it up. Can you refresh my memory what the cost of that one was?
So that was an infrared machine. believe to purchase that was about 45,000. That was about 45,000. It was infrared. It basically heats the pavement up, and then the ongoing expense of bringing in additional pavement or wrap. About 45,000 plus then somebody to run it. We found that there's 2 crews in our area, one in the valley, one in Anchorage, that operate those, and it's been cost effective to contract that along with our crack seal as opposed to going out and buying one. So it's long term. It'd be something. It'd be nice to have, but then again, having the crew to operate it like anything else, we're really 4 operators in the summer, 3. We bounced to 4 in the winter, so that's been our drawback. We can have the best equipment, but then it becomes okay. What are we working on? We're going to work on the road, or we're going to work on those street lights that have, we have to dig up the line, or all the other pieces that go with summer maintenance. Once we get all our street lights in conduit, we shouldn't be digging up as much anymore, and it's a slow process. So, but that's really what takes up a lot of our time in the summer.
Madam Mayor.
Yes. Sir.
And I appreciate the manager's impression on the contract base. Just driving up and down some of the roads this summer, Felton, there's a lot of where the pavement is starting to pump in certain areas and it's starting to break apart. And I know that if we had a piece of equipment like that, we could prolong the life of some of these roads. So I don't know if it's something that we need to kind of have in our game plan to survey kind of these locations and potentially set up for a contract situation where we could kind of give them a contractor, a dozen different spots throughout the, springtime to go and hit, that we can kind of work that into our budget as well.
Yes, that piece of Felton is an interesting road. It's starting to fail because of in my assessment, it's failing because of the gravel trucks that are not going up and down that road more so than the number of cars. So this piece of equipment wouldn't help. It's like trying to patch a hole in your drywall as opposed to replacing the whole sheet because it's rotten. That's what we're doing with this thing. It's good for small patches, but for Felton, where the road is starting to do this or this, it doesn't fix those type of things. We'd have to actually dig those humps out, and then we could repair the asphalt at that point. But if we've dug up enough, if we're really gonna, Felton should be on our list, and it's not. Much like Cobb, it's in the same general condition, so it'll need to be upgraded from Palmer Wasilla to Moore Road at some point. Probably not all the way to Moore Road, but at least to where the gravel pit is. We've asked them to start using some different routes so they aren't completely going up and down the same ruts all the time. So that's it for 2020. As we look to the future, just some highlights on things that are coming up.
I'm sorry. Oh, Councilman Carrington, did you have some comments outside of Mike?
Would that look like we'd have to consider like putting 100,000 in the 2020 budget, and then even possibly having a line item in the capital budget to kind of remind us that this is going to be more than a year project?
So we could put it in operations under planning. It could go there, but because I think this is probably going to be a multi-year project, setting aside funds and capitals would be, I think, how we would best capture the overall piece. That way we can go over from year to year and add to it as we need to. We shouldn't have to do again. This fiscal study we shouldn't have to do again. In the survey we shouldn't have to do again. It's really the public portion. But then the piece we haven't talked about is actually writing the plan, or writing the petition that goes to LBC. We don't have expertise either. We could fumble through it and go back and forth, but I don't think once we get ready to do that, I think we want it done by a planning organization. And there's people out there.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Any kind of ballpark figure on what writing of the plan document would be?
My guess is 75,000 maybe. I think that would be a relatively safe number.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilwoman.
So we would, for the petition purposes, we would probably plan for that for 2021, or was that something that you think we would get to in 2020?
No, I think 2021 would be ambitious.
Okay, thank you.
So 2022 then, you think, for,
I think so. I think we could start the plan in 2021, late 2020. But then have something, again, it's gonna depend on the public,
right,
how much we have to shape what the boundaries look like.
right,
If everybody comes in with open arms, says, yes, take us all, then it's easy. But,
Right.
the sense at the, the sense at the managers meeting was across Alaska, they are never like that unless you're just taking one parcel at a time. It's just that there's
Right.
people that are uninformed that aren't even within the area that will come out, and, lodge a complaint because, your government, you're getting too big. Regardless if they're in Palmer or Greater Palmer, they will come out and
right.
provide input, whether it's helpful or not.
And then also at that time, we would be looking at if the area we're gonna bring in, doesn't balance out revenue versus expenses, if we have to hire additional police, we have to hire, get another road grader, hire a couple more operators, all of that, has to be then, would have to be in the operation budget at some time.
And that's part of that fiscal study that it'll determine, okay, here's, in today's dollars, or if we, okay, we give them parameters, here's what we wanna look like in 20 years, we wanna be to Trunk, and we wanna be the edge of Sutton, and we wanna be to the interchange, and, maybe the Butte, I don't know, Lazy Mountain,
Right.
how big is that? Here's what we wanna look like in 25 years, and okay, well, how do we do that fiscally, how do we do it in chunks? Where does it make sense, can we afford to go across the river with our equipment? Well, maybe, maybe we have another station over there, so it's, those kind of things should come out in the fiscal plan, a fiscal study, and then we can, then we look at it and determine, okay, we can do this in 5 years because we have money in our capital budget to boost up equipment. And it's gonna give us a bump in revenue, we can add a police officer and road, so those are the pieces that should come out of the fiscal study.
Okay,
And then we can, again, based on time and public input, this looks like we can achieve this in 5 years or 3 years. This looks like we can achieve in 10, and then in 20, we look like this. So that's, the first piece has to be the fiscal study. And we could probably do it ourselves, but it's gonna be jaded. And it won't be scientific, and, cause we have a sense of how many police officers it would take to go
sure,
out there, but
right,
who trusts us to do that in public? You have a third party that's got the degrees and all this kind of stuff, so it gives it validity also with the board, so.
any further questions? Now, Councilman Carrington, do you have anything? I guess not.
So 2021, we want some items listed in relatively expensive, depot windows, that's kind of a nice to have piece, it's more efficiency, I think it should be efficiency driven as opposed to aesthetics.
Oops.
Some handles are starting to age, we can replace handles, but do an outright window replacement, we can see where we stand, especially once we do some insulation, whether or not the windows have to be done that year, so that could potentially bump. The same thing with the dump truck and the plow blade for 2021, that's about where we put it, thinking that the frontage road and that development area being a long shot. It'd be nice to have, if we can't afford it, or there's something else in priority, that can move as well. That's just kind of where we thought it would go a couple of years ago, and I didn't move it. When we start looking into 2022 with there's again some really big ticket items. There's the November taxiway design, when talking to the FAA, those funds, they're looking like they're gonna fund that at the level of $6 to $7 million for design build. So for us, that's 6.75%. You know, it's a pretty good deal, but it comes up, you know, that's about 500,000. But it opens up that section. Can we afford to do that then, based on, you know, a couple of years from now? You know, it's a good placeholder, but we'll see how that turns out. But the good news is the FAA says we're maxed out in their book, and we will be by this time. So that is it would be a priority project for the FAA to fund. So in that sense, it's a good news. Comes with a price tag though. Fire engine, we've got one fire engine that's really old. Fire department would like to have it this year, and that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen next year. They've got another one that's right behind it, and these are Palmer fire trucks. The benefit of being partnered with the Greater Palmer Fire Service Area is they've got newer equipment, so we are able to, you know, we store, move things around, and use the newer stuff first, and then in reserve, it's really Palmer stuff is in reserve, is how the equipment's being used. But at some point in time, Palmer is gonna need to buy another fire truck. The aerial truck is ours, but the big engines are Greater Palmer Fire Service Area property. Street sweeper, we're limping along. That's probably about the time we're gonna need one. The vac truck, same thing, it works, but it's being overworked. And then a steam truck, we could probably bump that a couple of years if we need to. Now, there's other funding sources besides, you know, just our general fund. USDA will help purchase equipment through, much like they did the water treatment plant, it's a grant loan process. But the loan part, will have to go to the voters. So stacking equipment into 1 year, so we can do one bond, it's 55% and the grant is 45, as opposed to, you know, just waiting until it's done. So those are some options there. The other piece is, I know, folks don't like to hear taxes, but Wacilla's been very good with a 0.5% sales tax with a dedicated project and a sunset. So in the out years, that might be something we look to, you know, put all the stuff together, we're gonna do a road package. This is what we're buying, so the voters know what they're paying for. When we hit this, either we do a bond, or we do a sales tax increase with a sunset. Same thing for the fire department. We can lump all the stuff together, so that it makes sense, or buy one truck, instead of having a big loan. So there's ways to get at these pieces instead of just paying cash. It's not the preferred option, you know, we'd like to just pay cash, but, cash has value, you know, maybe we keep some in case a water line breaks. But the interest rates are still pretty favorable, at least for next year. But I'm not proposing we do that next year, but as we look to some of these big things, you know, that might be what we have to turn to. Same thing with the fire station. I don't know that this fire station will ever go away, because of our ISO rating, because it has to be within a certain radius of the big commercial stuff. But if taxiway November goes in, we're gonna have to move, we're gonna have to move that area. So we're gonna do that. We should build a fire station where it makes sense. Of course, that's several $1,000,000. There's ways to fund that. If we do it on the airport, then there's potential that we can get FAA to help if it's dedicated to the airport. But again, there's other sources of funding we can tap into. It's just instead of all of our cash. But you know, those decisions are still down the road. But we need to be thinking about, okay, how are we gonna do these big things in the future that are coming up? And if we don't need to do it, you know, if we can milk the truck along, the fire truck another year, it is 1982 is the age of the truck. But much like our aerial truck, we couldn't get parts anymore. So, and we sold it for $5,000. Because nobody else can get parts for it either. My guess is somebody's gonna take that in the woods and put that truck ladder up, and that's their hunting stand. 'Cause that's about all it's good for. The next big thing, we look down to 2023 and 2025 is stormwater. The good news with the census is we think it's gonna push us into this planning organization, the transportation planning organization, which comes with a flood of federal money. The other side of that is it comes with a flood of federal regulations, and stormwater is probably the biggest one that's coming down the road. And this isn't just Palmer, it's the borough, and the borough feeds right into our storm system, So it's gonna have to be a partnership, for landowners, governments that have government stake in all this, and then of course the state that runs the river. So that's gonna come with a pretty hefty price tag. But the first phase of that is a study. We're not required to do it now, but once we hit that threshold, we'll need to do a study just to determine what the requirements are for stormwater if we're not meeting it already. And then based on the last year's 1,000-year flood in Palmer, we know that our system is probably undersized for another storm like that.
Yeah, right.
And then the last page, there's some stuff on there that's probably obsolete. You know, the emergency generator for City Hall. We moved away from the City Hall being the IT hub. We still have servers down there, but it's a lot of it's been moved to other places. So the police department is on its own. Our email is now on the cloud, run by Microsoft. So we're less reliant on this building to keep the city running. So having a generator for this building is not necessarily something we need to pursue. It's a good idea at the time, but we've changed in how we operate. Having a generator for the fire training center would make sense because that's where we would go if we need to have an emergency operations center. So that's still on the project list. Next one down, I'm on page 178, I believe. Fire truck and brush equipment, those are
77.
77. Those are, that's not the same truck we talked about. Those are additional trucks. It's a brush truck. We're pretty healthy right now. That's why these don't have a year, but it's gonna get to a point where we have to replace that truck too. Snow dump lots. Right now we're using the airport for quite a bit. If we lease those lots, then we no longer have snow dump lots, so we're gonna need to start projecting where we dump snow next. There's some potential other places in the city that might work down by the airport. It's private property now. There might be some options to purchase some land there. I don't know that we could use the Copperwood, or that we want to use I can refer to it as Copperwood property, but there's potential that we could use that as a snow dump lot up there. The problem with that is DEC requires us to monitor it because we're dumping other than snow in some of these places, and being that close to the river with scrapings from our roads isn't necessarily a good thing or something that we want to continue to monitor. So we have to be very careful on where we choose land for a snow dump, but that's probably something we're gonna need to look at in the future. Library, these are some carryover projects. I haven't heard much rumbling about a new library. I'm sure Friends of the Library would like to have a new library, but there hasn't been any fundraising effort and no design time. But it's on there because that was a project I inherited 4 years ago. Where we talked about a new fire station. Same thing with the museum. I've heard more grumbles about the museum than I have about the library, and the Friends of the Palmer Museum of History and Art is really, they're driving that. And if they can generate funds or get grants to do that, we'd be willing to listen to how that goes. Already talked about Cobb, the water tower purchase. I know Council Member Fuller asked last year, well, how'd you come up with that number? When I started 4 years ago, it was 75,000, so I just added to it. I think I'm done adding to it. It's not for sale. There's been a group that's been trying to work that purchase. So if there's a desire or a willingness on the person that owns that to sell it and reconfigure their property under it so that it's not, we're not just buying the tower and have to move it. That's a good starting point. Again, we'd have to have some kind of Friends of the Tower group to pursue this with us. Restore the tracks to downtown Palmer. I think that's just the Palmer portion of it. The railroad won't do anything. My understanding is the railroad won't touch us until they get the gravel part of it straightened out. So if they do that, then this would be, and they may do the whole thing, but their intent is to make that line faster for the gravel cars, and if they can take the track all the way into Palmer as part of that project, capturing additional federal dollars, then that'd be great. But this is $3 million we don't have, so if the federal government wants to give it to us, I always send this to Senator Murkowski for her infrastructure list, because she maintains that for Alaska, and we'll see where that goes. Park project, walk to the fair. I'm not sure how much emphasis this has anymore now that the Glen Highway has that pathway on the opposite side. It'd be nice to take the railroad tracks all the way in, but that is counter to what we just talked about. If we're gonna bring the railroad tracks in, you're not gonna have a trail on the tracks
Right.
unless you have a fence. So they're it's, in my mind, it's one or the other, and we haven't decided that we're going with one or the other, to approach the railroad one way or the other. The Bab Arboretum, we've done a lot of work there. This is a pretty ambitious project. I don't know that anybody has come to, LaGrange folks haven't, to, make that park more than it is. I think this is more an extension of folks wanting to take, the Arboretum and green space, the safety runway zone, and turn that into a park, but the FAA won't allow us to do that, so I think that's a carryover from more than anything else. But that land, will be leased, for hay operations, so it'll have some nice looking hay, instead of just the bumpy weeds that we've had in the past. But it won't ever be an extension of the Arboretum just because the FAA has said no. And then the last one is Sherrod, area gravel to road resurfacing. Again, that's just part of that project, of the water project that was going on. We never did finish those roads, so it's just an extension of that. And that's it in a nutshell for proposed projects and future projects. So the very last page, just to highlight, 661,000 from the unassigned, fund balance. If we continue with the way we're going if we do the amendment for the healthcare, that'll knock it down by 180, and then potentially 200,000 going back in, which would give us a net of about 316,000, coming out of the, making our unassigned fund balance not look like 2.9, it'd look more like 2.6, which is better than I projected earlier. And then any other projects, y'all wanna add, or these that can be taken away, that's pretty much where I stand at this point.
Okay. Ready, should we go ahead, can I get a motion to come out of committee on the whole, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, questions, any amendment? Would you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Jill Valerius,
Yes.
Councilmember Sabrina Combs,
Yes.
Councilmember Steve Carrington,
Yes.
Councilmember Richard Best, Councilmember Julie Burbright,
Yes.
Mayor Edna DeVries.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. We are now out of the committee of the whole. Records of items placed on the table, Madam Clerk.
We do not have any tonight.
Okay, aren't gonna say anything about the new CIP.
There are no changes in the new CIP pages. All that is just a blow up of what's already in the packet. So it's not additional information. That's what's already received.
Well, the airport portion was.
Well, then I was fibbed.
I mean, I don't know.
I handwrote it.
Yeah, he wrote it in there.
you hand wrote on there. Then yeah, with that change that I did not get. Yes, that's an item placed on the table now. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Write on them anymore.
Okay, council member
Get a copy since I didn't get one.
comments, anyone wanna comment before we adjourn in the next meeting? No, okay. So with that, we will adjourn our special meeting. And we will come back at 7 o'clock.